Hello and welcome to the HCSIS Restraint Submodule webinar. My name is Christine and I'm part of the DDS training team. Today we're going to discuss the addition of restraint reporting for ABI-MFP populations and the process to enter restraints into HCSIS. Here's our agenda for today. We will begin by covering the restraint reporting context, followed by the restraint reporting features and the restraint reporting workflow. We will then demonstrate the workflow in HCSIS to complete a restraint report. Then we will discuss management reports related to restraints and talk about resources available to you to help you with restraint reporting in HCSIS. Restraints are not allowed in any waiver program. However, there may be rare emergency situations in which restraints are applied to safeguard individuals. These restraints must be reported through the HCSIS Restraint Reporting module. Previously, ABI-MFP waivers required that any restraint was reported to DPPC. This was not an optimal solution, given that restraints applied in an emergency are typically not reportable to DPPC. Also, this requirement did not allow DDS and MRC to fully monitor and track any restraint use within ABI-MFP. Due to the ABI-MFP waiver renewal changes, it is now required that these restraints must be reported using the HCSIS Restraint Reporting module. Staff and provider programs who may encounter these emergency situations will be trained in one of the DDS certified crisis prevention response and restraint programs, which include training for how to correctly minimize events to prevent restraints and when they must be used for the safety of the individual or others, emphasizing the de-escalation and the use of restraints as the last resort, and when they have to be used for the safety of the individual or others, providers know how to safely use restraints. This will allow for high rate of restraint utilization to be addressed in a similar method as restraints on the DDS intellectual disability waivers. DDS ID and ABI-MFP staff and MRC ABI-MFP staff will use this restraint module to complete and review restraint reports, associated restraint management reports, and waiver assurance reports for the ABI-MFP population. There are different roles for staff in the system. Your role in the system will determine if you can edit and/or read information in the system. We will cover each step and role in more detail throughout this presentation. The Restraint Manager Review screen will add the Crisis Prevention Response and Restraint, also known as CPRR curriculum, utilized drop-down prompt as the first mandatory question on the screen. You will not be able to multi-select options from this drop-down. With the addition of ABI-MFP populations certain filter names have been changed and new filter options such as ABI-MFP area offices, regional offices, and waiver programs have been added to management reports to assist you in refining your report outputs. This is the restraint reporting workflow. The process will begin with the restraint report, followed by the restraint manager review, both of which are typically entered by the provider. After the restraint manager review is completed, the area office review, human rights committee review, and commissioner review are available to be completed by their respective staff. The last three reviews may be completed in tandem in order to expedite the restraint process. Now, let's take a deeper dive into each step of the process and look at the roles involved. We will list all roles involved in each step of the restraint process as we move through our training. Based on your role and access, you may or may not be involved in certain steps of the restraint process. The first step in the process is to create the restraint report in HCSIS. Multiple roles and scopes may create the restraint report, but only the IM supervisor role, restraint supervisor role, and the central office restraint reporting designee may finalize the restraint report. If your role cannot finalize the report, you will be required to save the report in HCSIS when you are finished. After a restraint occurs, relevant roles will be required to fill out a restraint report. The report consists of 6 screens: the Restraint Basic Information screen, the Restraint Information 2 screen, Type of Restraint screen, Involved Party screen, the Individual's Condition, and the Individual's Interview screen. We will discuss the content of each screen in more detail when we do our walkthrough in HCSIS. Please keep in mind that each screen has mandatory and/or conditionally mandatory prompts. The system will not allow you to submit or finalize the report without completing these prompts. Alerts will be sent to designated roles when the report is submitted or finalized so they can complete the restraint manager review. Now, for step 2 in the process, the restraint manager review needs to be completed. Each scope has a role that may complete the restraint manager review. If a designated role approves the restraint report and finalizes the restraint manager review, the area office review, human rights committee review, and the commissioner review can be completed. Here are the 2 screens that encompass the restraint manager review. The first screen includes the new CPRR curriculum utilized field. The prompts cover the restraint action to see if all procedures and protocols were followed. If not, you may select the checkboxes that correspond to areas of improvement. The second screen enables you to add more details to the review and any further comments that you may have regarding the restraint. Next, we will cover the area office review. All roles listed here may add information to the area office review and save the screen, but only the roles listed in the right column may finalize the report. I'll give you a minute to take a look at that and review. The area office review is an important step in completing the restraint report. For the prompt completion status, if the user selects Not Complete from the dropdown, the restraint report and the restraint manager review statuses will be changed from finalized to not approved. This will generate a second create link for both steps. The data previously entered for all screens will pre-populate into the new report screens. Additionally, if the Human Rights Committee review and/or the Commissioner's review were also completed, they would need to be finalized again. The area office review cannot be completed until the restraint report and the restraint manager review steps have been finalized again. Once they are finalized, the area office review can once again be finalized. If the completion status is marked as completed, the report can be finalized and the restraint report process can continue. Now, for the fourth step in the process, the Human Rights Committee review. Remember, this can be done in HCSIS at the same time as the area office review and commissioner review. The following roles can both compile information for the Human Rights Committee review as well as finalize it. And those roles include the Human Rights Coordinator, the Human Rights Specialist, and the Restraint Human Rights Committee Reviewer. In the fourth step of our process, the Human Rights Committee documents when the Human Rights Committee review occurred, its content, and any additional comments regarding the review. The Human Rights Coordinator or equivalent role will enter the date of review and the comments of the Human Rights Committee as shown in the screenshot. Once those mandatory fields are completed, the review can be finalized. Now, the restraint report needs to go for the Commissioner's review. The following roles listed on this slide can both compile information for the Commissioner's review as well as finalize it. I will give you a minute to review those roles. The Commissioner's review is an optional screen and has one mandatory prompt that requires an input to finalize the screen. Enter your response to the review and comment prompt and finalize the screen. After the area office review is finalized, you have 120 days to complete the commissioner's review. If the review is not completed, the restraint report process will close. Once the review is finalized, the restraint review process will be considered complete. There may be certain situations that call for a restraint to be deleted. The Human Rights Director and the Central Office Restraint Reporting designee can delete a restraint using the delete event utility. Now that we've familiarized ourselves with the restraint process and the approvals needed, let's go ahead and complete all those steps in HCSIS. We will start out as the IM supervisor role for Provider Advocates, Inc. to complete the restraint report. From the home page, click QM, IM, and then the event data entry. Search for a restraint using at least one of the search criteria in the individual event criteria box. Let's use the identifier type and select eligibility number from the dropdown and enter the eligibility number into the identifier field. And then we'll click search. Then let's go ahead and click on the Daniel Test Right hyperlink. Then we're going to click on the New Restraint button to be taken to the Restraint Basic Information screen. Now we will complete all mandatory prompts related to the new restraint. Let's complete the location where restraint occurred and then the restraint type. And we will select physical for the restraint type. Now let's select the date of the restraint by clicking the calendar icon and selecting the date. For our case, we will say that the restraint occurred today from 8:30 a.m. to 9 a.m. and we will click the corresponding date box. Now let's input the time of restraint, the date of restraint removal, and the time of restraint removal. The duration of restraint field will auto-populate based on the times inputted on the time of restraint and the time of restraint removal fields. This time cannot be greater than 2 hours. Now let's indicate if an incident report was filed as a result of this restraint by selecting yes or no from the dropdown. We will select no. However, if there was an injury to the individual and medical treatment was required, for example, an incident report would also need to be entered in HCSIS. The next prompt is conditionally mandatory if we selected yes, and you would need to enter the incident ID. The next mandatory field requires us to enter the first name and last name of the staff identifying the emergency. We will input a sample name. Let's put in test test. If the staff position is known, input this information, but it is not required to complete the screen. Next, we will need to input a description of the emergency situation for more detailed reporting of the event. So let's go ahead and type in the person was running into a busy street. Lastly, select the checkboxes that best characterize the emergency event. You may select more than one option. In our case, we will go ahead and select substantial risk of self-injurious behavior. To complete the screen, save your responses and navigate to the Restraint Information to screen by clicking Save and Continue. All prompts presented on the Restraint to screen are mandatory and involve actions taken prior to the restraints and any injury caused to the individual or staff as a result of the restraint. Input other less restrictive methods used prior to the restraint. For that question, let's go ahead and type in verbal prompts to remain on the sidewalk. Next, any other relevant events prior to the emergency situation should be listed in the antecedent to emergency situation text box. Let's type in that the individual was distracted by activity across the street. The final two drop-downs have to deal with injury to the individual or staff. Indicate yes or no in the drop-down. In our case, we will say there was no injuries caused by the restraint. Then let's go ahead and save our responses and move to the physical restraint screen. This screen changes based on the restraint type selected. Here, we need to describe how the restraint intervention was implemented by clicking into the restraint intervention text box. Let's type in one person escort with an arm hold. The next prompt covers the position of the person during restraint. If they were in multiple positions during the course of the restraint, select all that apply. We will select escort. The next prompt is conditionally mandatory based on if specialized individual protocol was used or other was selected in the previous prompt. In our case, we will leave this blank as specialized individual protocol was not used and we did not select other. The next four prompts address if any other restraints were used in addition to the original restraint selected. In our case, we will select no to the mandatory prompts and move on to the describe individual's behavior and condition during restraint and safety checks prompt. For the describe individual's behavior and condition during restraint and safety checks, enter any relevant information regarding the individual's behavior and safety checks conducted during the course of the restraint. So let's go ahead and type in the individual initially resisted redirection, but when he saw the oncoming car, he complied. For our next prompt, input the reason for why the restraint was removed. Let's type in the individual was safely back on the sidewalk. The last prompt on the screen, describe behavior and give indicators of individual's condition after restraint, is used to outline the individual demeanor following the restraint. We will input calmly continue to walk on the sidewalk, and then we will click Save and Continue to move on to the involved party screen. On the involved party screen, you will be required to list all involved parties who were involved in the restraint. We will say our first individual named Test authorized and applied the restraint, and we will click Save. We now have the option to add, edit, or delete any involved parties. For us, we will add a second individual, user, who also applied the restraint, and then we're going to go ahead and click Save. With all involved parties entered in the system, we can move on to the individual's condition screen by clicking Save and Continue. On the individual's condition screen, we would select a monitoring type and then complete the following prompts and click Save to remain on the screen and complete any other additional monitoring types. However, this screen is not mandatory if no monitoring is necessary, as in this case where the hold was for a brief few minutes, so we will not be completing this screen. We can click Save and Continue without entering information and move on to the individual's interview screen to complete the restraint report. On this screen, we will input all relevant information regarding the interview. We will begin with entering the name of the staff, Test. If the individual commented during the interview, select Yes and complete the prompt, Individual's comment. For our case, we will select Yes and then input into the box, I can take care of myself without being held like a child. All the same, I am grateful. I had not seen the car. If the staff had a comment, input a response for the staff's comment prompt. So let's go ahead and input in, it might be beneficial to add in the plan the staff should keep reminding the individual to slow down and look both sides of the road before crossing. Based on your role and scope, you may be able to finalize a restraint report. As the IM supervisor role, we have finalized access and will finalize the restraint report. If your role does not have finalized access, the button would say Submit instead of Finalize, and an alert would be sent to the restraint manager to review the report and complete the restraint report. The next step in the workflow is to complete the restraint manager review. The provider restraint manager can edit and finalize this report. Our current user has compatible scope to complete the restraint report. So we will begin from the switchboard to start the review. Click the Create link under the Provider Restraint Manager review. The first page contains the new CPRR curriculum utilized prompt, which stands for the Crisis Prevention, Response, and Restraint. So let's click on the drop-down to show options for the restraint report. We will say we utilize the CALM curriculum. Next, for the prompt, were all procedures and protocols followed for this restraint action? We need to select the response from the drop-down. If your answer to the drop-down is no, then you need to click on the applicable checkboxes to explain where restraint actions could have been improved. In our case, we will say that the restraint covered all procedures and protocols and select yes. Since the checkboxes are not applicable to our restraint, we will click Save and Continue. On this screen, the restraint manager would enter information related to the review and any additional comments related to the restraint, and click Finalize to complete the review and return to the switchboard. The next three reviews can occur concurrently to aid in expediting the time it takes to complete restraint reporting. The next review we will complete will be the Area Management Review. As the Area Office Director or designee, you can click Create under the Area Management Review heading on the switchboard to complete the review. On this screen, the area office can indicate if the review was completed, approved, and additional comments and recommendations on the restraint, such as, was it the least restrictive intervention that could have been used? If incomplete was selected from the drop-down, the provider restraint report and restraint manager review would not be approved and would no longer be finalized. The status would change to in progress. For our case, we will say the review was completed and the restraint used was the least restrictive. So let's go ahead and type in Individual may benefit from a road safety assessment and a teaching plan on community outing safety. Now let's finalize the report and return to the switchboard to complete the Human Rights Committee review and comment as the provider human rights coordinator. Let's begin the Human Rights Committee review and comment by clicking Create under Human Rights Committee Review and Comment. The Human Rights Committee user would note the date of the review for this restraint, and the HR coordinator would input the review and comment. We will say the review occurred today and insert: the agency needs to review road safety skills with the individual before going on a walk. If a plan was developed to reduce the use of restraints on this individual, the third prompt becomes mandatory. The fourth prompt is conditionally mandatory if the answer to the previous prompt was yes. For our case, we will say a plan has been developed and is in effect for this individual. So let's go ahead and select yes and yes. With all mandatory and conditionally mandatory prompts answered, we can finalize this review and return to the switchboard. Now, let's complete the Commissioner's review as the DDS ABI-MFP Director. Now that we're back on the switchboard, we can complete the Commissioner's review by clicking Create under the Commissioner's Review and Comment heading. There is one mandatory prompt on the screen to describe the review and other comments on the review. Let's go ahead and enter "No concerns noted." With a response to the prompt, we can now finalize the review and return to the switchboard by clicking the Finalize button. And now the restraint report is completed. But before we exit HCSIS, let's show you the pathway to reach restraint management reports from the home screen. So from the home screen, let's click on QM Reports and then click on the plus sign next to the restraint management to expand the selection and view the report options. Here you can generate all restraint reports as well as view a brief description of the management report content. We will now exit HCSIS and return to our presentation to discuss updates to the restraint management reports in further detail. Speaking of management reports, let's take a closer look at what is available for you to generate. Listed in the table below are the three report names and the descriptions as they appear in HCSIS. The three additional fields and/or filters listed here have been added. As mentioned previously, the reports will receive new features such as new fields or filters due to the inclusion of the ABI-MFP populations in the workflow, but no new reports will be added or removed. The restraint detail report will receive a new system prompt, a new search filter, and a report column to accommodate this change. The restraint status report will receive new filter drop-down choices to include ABI-MFP populations. Additionally, the field DDS document status label has been changed to DDS MRC document status. The restraint timeline report will also receive new filter options for the ABI-MFP populations. As you use restraints reporting for ABI-MFP, don't hesitate to contact the help desk if you have any questions. Help desk representatives are available to ensure your issues are heard and properly addressed by a HCSIS business analyst who will be able to help you work through system errors or answer your questions about the system. Emailing the help desk is the best way to reach them and document your request so that a business analyst can be assigned to assist you. Take note of the help desk's phone, email, and hours of operations, which are from 6 a.m. to midnight, Monday through Friday, and 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. on the weekends. Additionally, other learning resources can be found within the Help tab in HCSIS, which can be found by clicking the QM tab, followed by the Help tab, and then the Restraints tab. This concludes our training on Restraints Reporting submodule. Thank you so much for listening in.